All right. So the one option we can do for the gray is using the Payne's gray that I have. I do like that gray a lot. Another option, and I'm just mixing up a pool of that so we can press it out. Another option is to actually make our own gray. And if you recall, a burnt sienna and an ultramarine blue, essentially a brown and a blue together, can make a good gray. But burnt sienna and ultramarine blue are like a trusted pair that you can use. I'm going to demonstrate that here. I've got a burnt sienna. Sorry, let me clean this a little bit more. Um, it's just as easy now. It took a while, and it took some practice. Um, and the thing is, like, I tend to use the same palette a lot over and over. Um, Meaning I have, like X number of colors in my box here. I don't stray too far outside of them because I find that I can actually use these to mix the colors I need. Um, every every once in a while, I'll change it up by adding a new color, and then it's fun to like challenge myself to like either embrace that new color or figure out new mixes that I should start using and just change up my palette more. Actually, not necessarily. Uh, what best conveys what you see could depend on your emotional reaction. So, like what I like about this scene is the contrast and how there's like this warm interior. So, depending on the colors that I have, I'm not trying to represent this completely accurately, but I do want to contrast the cool and warm differences. And um, if I use a stock gray, that stock gray, like Payne's gray, has like um, it's composed of like a more bluish mixture. That might be all right, but since I know that I can use burnt sienna, and burnt sienna will work well in certain parts of this painting, I like to try using colors that exist in the scene or that I'm going to use in the scene and try to make everything harmonize based on those. So if I can come up with a gray that's based on a color or two that appear in my scene, that will make it seem more cohesive. Does that make sense? But if I'm always, yeah. So if I'm always ultra burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just treat this whole thing as one big block of gray. I'm going to make a base layer here, and I'm wetting the whole surface of the structure, including the tree and everything around it. Bless you. Avoiding the place that I marked X. All right. Remember, this is my base layer. I'm not trying to replicate the actual final structure or the final colors. I'm putting down this because I want to have highlights that will be, that will reflect what we're seeing in that the highlights are also a gray. So I have to act fast because it's pretty dry here, and it's probably pretty dry where you are as well, right? But you have to act fast. So you have to mix a good puddle of it first. Yeah, I mean, I find that the color that I mix together, for some reason, it theoretically it feels like it would be hard to get back to that, um, but it's actually not that hard. And I feel like that's something I've just gotten used to. And I'm not regularly mixing like more than two colors together, unless there's this very specific thing that I'm trying to capture. Usually it's just two, and um, that's what the scrap paper is good for. Um, yeah, so this area is pretty dry. So I'm letting the structure dry, and then let me go back to this area here. Um, I'm going to be very loose here with the greens. Um, so I usually treat this type of foliage with some yellow. So I start off with like a yellowish green, and then go into another mid-value green, and then a darker green. I think to save time, what I'll do is I'm actually just going to wet this, and just going to put some yellow straight in there. And I'm going to pick a warmish yellow. I mean, yellows are all warm relative to other colors, but some yellows will feel warmer than others. There's like a lemon yellow is like a cooler one. There's a Hansa yellow. I'm going to take some liberty here and just put in some yellow here. Now, obviously, yeah, lemon yellow. I'm using a Hansa yellow medium. It's on the warmer side of the spectrum. But you notice, since I'm putting it down on a blue background, it's already helping me to achieve some green effect anyway. So I'm just being really rough here. I'm just putting in some yellow because, there's some up here. Okay. And I'm going to start going into the greens. And I'm mixing the green directly into the yellow. Yeah, yeah. So now I'm just going directly on top of this. And this is very rough. I'm just approximating, you know, the shape of these blobs basically that I'm seeing. This is what helps to give dimension to these blobs of foliage. And remember, the light is coming from, so the darker green helps convey the shadow side. So yeah, it is because it's cooler. We are going to get cooler and cooler as we get darker anyway. All right, now I'm going to go in with a cooler green that even helps us to make more shadow. So really, really rough, right? And you don't have to be exact with this because as we go along, we're going to put in more careful details that will help fill in what's going on. I'm going to let that sit for a little bit because I want this to be dry so I can put in the trunks. All right. Actually, I'm going to put in some green over here too. It's a darker. Okay, now I'm going to go back in. I'm going to use the Payne's gray actually. And I'm going to start going over the structure here. Mm, yeah. If we were really picky about the cool and warm, we would be, so like I have my colors laid out in my palette from left to right is warm to cool. So generally, I'm always pretty much working with a cool versus warm mindset. Um, I tend to like putting in shadows and creating a lot of contrast, and um, a lot of it starts with the actual picture that I start with. You know, I take pictures where I think the contrast in the composition is already going to make a great painting. So I don't have to think too much about like um, what is cool and what is warm. And in this situation, it's pretty evident. You know, anything that's in the light, naturally, it is warmer. Um, yeah, yeah. So here I'm actually using the gray, the darker gray, to indicate the direction of the light that's hitting it. Let's see here. A little too dark. So I feel like I've officially entered the ugly phase right now. And it's just one of those things that you just have to push through. And sometimes it helps me, I mentioned this before, to actually like start putting in some of the really contrasty areas. And it helps me to see, okay, I'm near, I'm helps me to feel comfortable that I'm going in the right direction. So I'm gonna do a very dark area here. Well, actually that's not dark. Gotta get more pigment. So the paper is raised a little bit here. So yeah, I mean, it, having a steady hand certainly helps, but you can fix this stuff even if it's a little off. And it fades in a little bit up here, or it fades out. Right. Do you mind hanging on a little bit past 7 o'clock? Okay. Now I'm going to try to do the other side of this. Um, so you see how there's actually a dark border around the exit on the other side. It's it's kind of a nice framing um, outline here. I'm going to first do the foliage on the other side, and then once that dries a little bit, then I'm going to put that frame in there with a smaller brush. I think that will help add a nice um, structural cohesion in the back. So I'm wetting the back. I'm going to put in some of this light green that I already have. just as a base. Okay, and then I'm going to go darker. There's a this Paraline green is the cooler version that I like. There's some blue sky back there. I can always put that in there. And then there's some much darker areas back there, which I'm going to just use. I'm going to add a little bit of my Payne's gray to the cooler green. A little too much water there. I dried my brush. I wiped off like a little bit on the paper, and then I just grabbed a little bit more pigment, um, and then went back into the. I added it to the green. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna let that dry a little bit, and then I'm gonna go back in and put that black, um, kind of very thin frame around that. And then you see, I also have these. I have these thin lines I want to do with vaulted ceilings. Yeah. Another cool thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to make this a little darker down here because of there's these shadows. And I'm going to go back in with the rose and I'm going to mix up. Um, Actually, it doesn't need to be too much, but I'm going to add some Payne's Gray to that to cool it down and put it in here. There's a lot you can do with a big brush, but eventually, when you get toward the end, um, there will be some limit. Um, let's see. This area down here is a little too, this white, it's not natural, it's too white. So I'm gonna actually fill it in a little bit with the water here and then add a little bit of gray. I'm gonna like spread that out a little bit. So it's not, just to take it away from the pure white. There are these edges here, I wanna kind of blend them in a little bit more. I've left out the lamp. I'm not gonna deal with that. It's really hard to make out anyway. Right. Yeah. Hi, Katie. Hi, Katie. How are you? I'm having I'm, I'm having fun painting. great. I it yeah, yeah. Yes. It's the really fun part. Sometimes with this big brush though, it's um it's a good limitation. It's a good limitation to have to it's not, it's not exact at all. And sometimes I need that to just let go. I'm not, I fight with every fiber of my being. I fight to go to the really detailed parts because there's still things I feel like I want to just like get the broad strokes down for. Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Like the foundation needs to be all there before you start working on the electrical. Don't want to torture your I don't want to torture any landlord analogies. What? Uh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Yeah. So here, take a look at this. So I'm the branches, right? I mean, the trunk are interrupted by the foliage. So I'm only doing parts of the trunk, and it's a very yeah, it's a very fun kind of effect, right? Because like you just only have to do parts of the trunk. I mean, sometimes it is really in front of everything else, but you notice how I'm conscious to make the trunk bigger and thicker than that one. And also, like some of the foliage actually ends up being really dark, you know, um, when it's blocking the. So since this was the piece that we started together last week, I'm just going to go ahead and, um, kind of go back into this, and I'm not going to spend too much longer on it, but I think we can get it to a good state where it's closer to the final piece than we were. If you recall, we worked on the, you know, putting in certain colors like the reddish tones to show the warmer interior of the Billings Arcade. And then we used the darker, Payne's gray to actually create the slashing shadows that are going across the facade. And we put in a good amount of like the dark passages, or at least the shapes for what should be the darkest areas, and we put in the foliage here on the right side. I think the goal right now will be to just in the next like 10, 12 minutes, just finish up these darker areas and really just put some final detailed touches to really make some of the finer elements of the structure stand out. So I'm going to go back into a Payne's gray, and I'm going to just mix a little bit of Payne's gray. You know, the photo is actually, the photo is still right now there's much more contrast and darker areas than we have in the painting. I'll try to get us closer to that contrast and the difference in values. We may not get there exactly, but hopefully you'll get the point. And Karen, if you're back, I'm just going to spend a few minutes to finish up this painting.
Okay.
And just get it to a good point, and then I'm going to move on to a fresh new painting. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I'm going to go off camera
No worries.
for my dinner. Sorry.
No worries. You can eat and enjoy yourself and just follow along. You don't have to do anything.
Okay.
So what I explained before was that I'm just going to put some finishing touches on this painting, which we started last week with Mac, and then I'm going to move on to a brand new painting. Mac is one of our attendees of the Booney sessions. He just recently snowbirded out to Tucson, Arizona. So,
How lovely.
Yes, thank you.
So this is also a good window into, you know, sometimes a painting is not completed. You can always come back to it at a later date, you know? So you can actually re-wet this whole thing. And you may not be able to fix everything about it, but once you've wet a certain area, it's almost like you're back in time to where you were last week. So it's certainly possible to re-wet certain areas and like try to revisit them and rework them. I see some darker passages in the interior of the arcade that I'm going to darken here and really just try to make that more prominent. And this is also a chance to like kind of go with a light wash of the Payne's gray over existing areas. And it kind of has it gives a nice effect because that is so dry from last week. It's a little harder to mess it up. I see a dark line here at the back of the arcade, and actually I'm going to just turn off that image because it may be hard for you to see. I want to be able to point to the image that's on my tablet that I'm looking at here. So you see back here, there's like a very thin dark edge. And I'm just going to put that in because it's very satisfying. Once you start putting these in, it's very satisfying because it feels like you're near the end. And it's okay that it's not perfect. You know, there's little bits of white showing through here. Some of that is intentional. Some of it I meant to keep whiter, but I accidentally covered it up last time. For example, the windows over here on the right side, not the windows, but I guess they are windows. But there's light shining through. And what we're going to do now is use my Payne's gray to really bring out the contrast between the darker interior and the windows. And part of that is by following these lines of the what do you call them? The vaulted ceiling, and using the lines to show like where it stops at the windows. So when I do that, actually I'm going to get a slightly smaller brush. This one might be a little too small, but so for example, I'm going to take this line so yeah, here's a little bit of, I want, it's a great skill to be able to be loose, but then sometimes, like in these instances, it's good to actually have a good amount of control over your brush. And then there's ways to kind of soften these so it's not like line drawing. So it's a small brush, so it can't really hold that much in terms of pigment. So I kind of have to like load it up and then go back to the well. And just paying attention to how, as things go further away, we're going to see these lines get closer together until at a certain point it's just going to be hard to differentiate them. And because they are further away, they also should be slightly lighter, right? So we're not emphasizing them too much. If we emphasize them too much and make them too dark, then your eyes are drawn to those in the back and it kind of feels unnatural. And you see how here on the right side, the columns that separate each of those windows are slightly darker. So those are also another chance to like actually show some definition. And also like as they go further away, they get slightly thinner. So that's another chance to show some perspective properly. And you can kind of see how the top of the windows, they go in this direction. So I want to make the crest of each kind of go down in this direction. So it's not perfect, but I think, the idea is to just make it as convincing as possible. All right, so now we're able to show some depth there. I'm going to add just a little bit of shading in the bottom just to reflect the shadows that are cast down here. There's lines going across. And it's actually darker back here, up here. It's okay if we're a little messy here because the inside is kind of messy. It's there's parts here that are like kind of scuffed up. right. And I'm going to make these areas up here darker because it's just a little too bright. I'm literally just kind of going over the areas that we already painted last week. And you know, if my brush is wet enough, the pigment remains transparent enough, and then you're just darkening it while letting the areas from last week still show up. In the greens, we see that it is pretty dark in the greens. So I'm going to continue adding some darker areas here. Also, I noticed I didn't really capture the surface of the top of the ledge. And part of the key here is, you know, cover up as much of the white of the paper as necessary to minimize distractions. So I think a good principle to follow when you are using dark colors to create the shadow and the dark areas, you want to make sure that they connect to each other and that there aren't just kind of mysterious whites of the paper kind of peeking through in certain dark passages. Those are like little distractions that will break up the continuity. It's different up here because we're talking about like bright blue sky. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to get a little bit more of the foliage here that's kind of fill in some of those areas, because right now there's a little too much branch or trunks. I'm going to take my sap green and add it to the Payne's gray actually. And that will give me, in my test area right here, you can see that it's like a darkish green. So I'm going to just take some of that and fill up. This is very, very loose, like blobs, right? Blobs of green that I'm adding. Very like undefined. Which to me feels more realistic. And not one part of it will be likely to like draw the viewer's eye away from what you want them to be looking at. Any questions so far? I think we're going to finish this one pretty soon. Just experimenting here, adding a little bit of green because there is green that's, the light is going through the leaves and casting some greenish tones. Sometimes you might find that creates a continuity that is very pleasing.